Hi, this is Dr. Kimberley Linert, and you're listening to Incredible Life Creator Podcast. My guest today is Poirier. Corey is a multiple-time TEDx, MoMondays and PMx speaker. He is also the host of the top-rated Conversations with Passion radio show, founder of the speaking program, BLU Talks, and he has been featured in multiple television specials. A columnist with Entrepreneur and Forbes magazine, he is featured in CBS, CTV, NBC, ABC, and is a Forbes Coaches Council member, and is one of the few leaders featured twice on the popular Entrepreneur on Fire show. He has also interviewed over 5,000 of the world's top leaders. One of his most recent talks took him to New York, where he had the extreme pleasure of speaking to at-risk youth at the Brooklyn Navy Yard Boys and Girls Club. A father to his young son Sebastian, boyfriend to Shelley, and a father to 2 fur babies, Corey is also a practicing Yogi and Rock Recording of the Year Nominee. Welcome to the podcast, Corey.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so super stoked to be here.
Yeah, so you have done a lot in your young life.
Yeah. It's funny when I look back, it seems a lot longer than it really has been because of that.
So you've had a lot of conversations. That's a lot of conversations. So I'd be curious to find out where you grew up, how you started out, how you got to be where you are today.
Well, where I grew up, which, I heard this story recently that they did a study, and it's something like 80% of the people in the world die within 100 miles of where they were born. And I never do that. And what triggered it, what reminded me of it the other day is I was reading something about John Ritter from Three's Company. Mm-hmm. And he was born in, I think it was Santa Barbara, California, and died in Santa Barbara or something like that. But it was like all those years later, all the years in Hollywood and it was literally the same area. And so why I bring that up is because as I talk to you right now, I'm in Prince Edward Island in Canada, which is where I actually grew up. Moved away, spent, 20 years of my life away. And my girlfriend and I got together. Interestingly enough, we're both from the same town, but we actually met on the other side of the country and both decided to move back home. And so that was not that long ago. So full circle, I grew up where I'm actually at now, which is kind of cool because it reminds me of that thing about we seem to come back to that place. Now, having said that, as far as how it shaped who I am now, I grew up in it's a small town. When I was growing up, it wasn't even called a city. Now they call it a city, but I think we just barely made it past the point of calling it a city. And I was raised by a single mother. I barely graduated high school, just to give you a perspective that I wasn't an academic by any stretch. And so I barely graduated. When I say that, I can back that up because I had one of my classes, I got a 49+1. Where a 50 was a pass. So I always say I technically didn't graduate high school. A teacher had to give me the +1. That meant I didn't have to go back another year. And another thing about me, which shaped who I am, is I didn't read my first book until I was 27 years of age, cover to cover. And that book was Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. And that book changed everything for me. So, when I look back, the things I take from that part of my story is, I do believe that it doesn't matter where you started, it's what you do next that makes the difference. And, I started, again, small town. When I say raised by a single mother, what I'm meaning there is we didn't have a whole lot of excess money. We did have the nights where we didn't know if we were going to have food. We did have I remember my mother worked for weeks to buy me a winter coat. And then somebody at school the next day stole it and replaced it with his same coat. He had the same coat as me, but his was all beat up and ratty. Mine had the name inside and everything. And I brought the ratty coat home and I told my mom I wanted to go. I knew who it was. I want to go and get my coat back. And she said, I know his life and it's worse than us. We'll find a way to get a new coat. And that really, because again, she worked weeks to buy that coat. And that, even something as small as that really shaped who I became. Because the idea of the compassion behind the fact that somebody always has it worse off than you. And that we could be grateful that she was able to find a way to get me another coat after another month or two of working and stuff. So it's kind of jumping around a bit, but that's really, my backstory really is centered around being a small town kid who was in a town where, most people would say it's going to be hard to achieve your goals. And I decided that I wasn't willing to accept that, moved across the country, and then discovered this book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it finally opened me up to the idea of personal development. And then my life just kind of went from there.
Wow. So did someone recommend that book, or you just happened to find it? Or?
So it was interesting because when I say too, as far as my life changed and everything and career changed, I feel like I was a go-getter, even if you look at the pattern of what I've been doing up until that point. For instance, I was in sales for 10 years, and I was in corporate sales. I worked for Toshiba, the large Fortune 500 company, and then a company called Konica Minolta, which is a Global 1000 company. And so I worked for, prestigious companies in the corporate world. And now I was in sales. I wasn't in a prestigious job, but I was in the prestigious company. But having said that, and I say that, I'm a huge sales nerd and I love sales, but I was, selling photocopiers door to door. I don't think most people would say it's a super sexy job. But having said all that, what happened is I went on this company retreat, and I remember we went to this retreat where there were 4 cottages where everybody was staying, but they put me and 3 other guys into one cottage by ourselves, and we had no vehicle, and the cottage was off in the middle of nowhere. So it's like, we can't even communicate with the people we're going on this retreat to hang out with. And then 2 of the people out of the 4 in the cottage, myself included, but 2 of the people, I wasn't really, for lack of a better way of saying it, I wasn't really big fans of. They were kind of big talkers, and they weren't actually backing up the big talk, but they were just constantly cutting people down. So I didn't have a desire to hang around with them while I was at the cottage where I was stuck with them at. And so my mother, unbeknownst to me, had put this book in my bag that she bought for $0.25 at a flea market. And so I pulled it out of my bag as a non-reader, and I said, well, my option is to hang out with the 2 negative dudes and the halfway decent dude, or read this book. Maybe I'll try a book again, because I had failed at 4 other books. And something about Dale Carnegie's writing style, I could still tell you what the first story was about. And that first page pulled me in, never let me go. Now I read 3 to 5 books a month. So that it changed everything. But yeah, to answer your question, I know where the book came from. Was my mother bought it at a flea market for $0.25. And I've often said, price is what you pay, but value is what you get. We bought the book for $0.25, and I would hinder to say that book's earned me millions of dollars based solely on what I learned from that book and what it triggered in the future, and hopefully impacted, at least thousands of lives based on the work that I decided to get into versus where I was going. So that, that's how I discovered the book. I didn't know it existed, and I wouldn't have picked that book, and it was written in like 1937. So it was even a different writing style than I would have thought I would have wanted to read, but who's to say what works? And then I read it a second time that weekend. So I actually jokingly say it's the first and second book I've read. And then the third book, or second, depending on which way you want to run with those numbers, was Think and Grow Rich. So I got really lucky in my first couple of books.
Yeah, awesome. And it sounds like you have the most amazing mother.
Yeah, she's pretty cool. She's pretty stellar. And, and she wouldn't mind me saying this because she's very open about it. But on top of what I just told you, she's also bipolar and had to deal with that. Growing up, my father and her got divorced, and the way that he treated the divorce didn't help her, certainly emotionally. And so I watched her, and then going through, not being able to, not having a lot of extra money around. I mean, I watched her go through all that, and she's still rock solid. In fact, now that we're able to come out of hiding, she's been watching our son 2 times a week, and she's in heaven as a grandmother for the first time. He's only 3, so she probably thought I wasn't going to have kids. Oh. And so yeah, so she's really a rock, and she's still, we're still as close as ever. And of course, I don't probably have to mention this based on saying all that, but I'm an only child, and then the other part to it is she's an only child. And my father's not really that in my life. So we ended up becoming really close and, yeah, bonded. So my mother, yeah, I think she's pretty cool. She's a rock star.
That is beautiful. And I have a 1.5-year-old granddaughter, first one, and it's the best thing ever. So exciting.
I think it's also nice. I think what she likes is that regardless of how tired he makes her, she can always say, "Here you go," and hand it back. Yeah. I think she thinks that's one of the best things about being a grandmother versus a mother. She couldn't hand me back. She can hand him back.
Oh, it's so different. It's so different. So.
And she can spoil him, and she doesn't have any repercussions. So
that is so true. So So you read this book, it opened up your eyes. So then did you stay in that sales situation or did you move on to something else?
Yeah, so I stayed in that corporate sales environment, same industry actually, for better part of 10 years. And I worked my way up to management, but at some point I realized it wasn't. It's funny because I actually liked my job where, a lot of people would say they didn't like it or they dreaded it every day. I actually liked it. I was getting to serve customers. I was also helping them figure out which salespeople were ripping them off. So I felt like I could sleep at night because I was saving them losing tons of money in their company because it was a pretty shady industry. So I was able to show them what to look for. When I get into the industry, people were signing blank contracts all the time.
Oh.
Like the salesperson would come and say, "Oh, I know you're in a rush. So I wrote down all the stuff, but I'll have to crunch the numbers later." And they get them the CEO who's busy to sign it, and then they could do whatever they wanted after that.
Oh.
And so I wanted to enlighten people about that, and the fact that because they just took it for granted that wasn't happening, and they didn't get a copy of it. And of course, the challenge is if they don't have a copy and it's out of sight, out of mind, and they're not looking at it because the accountant's paying it and the CEO signed it, then it doesn't get discovered. And then at the end of the contract, they're like, "Oh, I guess that must have been what I agreed to," because they don't remember. And of course, the salespeople would just put it up enough that it was almost ludicrous, but not enough that it was illegal. And so then they would make lots of money off this person who didn't know otherwise. So for me, I did like it because I was helping the industry and I could sleep at night and I was helping customers, but it wasn't fulfilling me because it wasn't my purpose. And so I did it for 10 years. And then the transition happened, which is a weird way to say this. And it wasn't like an immediate transition, but I wrote a stage play that I put in a festival. And I always had liked writing. I was a songwriter, but I never wanted to be the performer. Like I always wanted to write for the other people. Mm-hmm. And I had this stage play I put in a Fringe Fest. And one of the actors, the lead actor, sprained his ankle on the way to the show. And he still ended up fulfilling the rest of the show, but he had a sprained ankle, so it was slower to do the costume changes. So I had to write a new character in the play, and everybody else was maxed out. So I had to write a character for me, even though I never wanted to be on a stage. And so I wrote this character where I could go out with my back to the audience, but I did the play's run. I mean, I was covered in sweat, and I wasn't even looking at the audience. I was that nervous. And I wrote the play that way. I changed it up a little bit. We made it through the 7 days, and I asked one of the actors, "How do you think I could get more comfortable with this thing? Because if this happens in the future, I need to be comfortable on a stage." And he said, "I don't know if this will help," but he said, "I'm taking a stand-up comedy workshop at the local university if you want to come with me." And I said, "Well, I can go to a workshop. It doesn't mean I'm ever going to get on a stage. I just want to go learn about comedy. I thought I'll learn about writing more as well." So I went to this university workshop for 2 weeks. The guy taught us how to adjust the mic stand and then told us his favorite comic was awesome. That was pretty much our training to get through the number one fear in the world. They say number one fear in the world above death is speaking. Comedy, I would argue, is even a bigger fear, but the reason it's not rated is because so few people ever try it. They just lump it in with speaking. So what happened was the third week, we thought people were going to entertain us, and we promoted the show and filled up the room, only to find out 5 minutes to showtime, we were the actual performers.
With no preparation.
No preparation, no material. The only thing we had for material a little bit is he had told us within the workshop to prep and talk with each other and talk about some premises that might work on stage. So that was all we had. And the thing I had going for me is I just traveled across the country, and there was funny stories I was telling people. And I thought, well, okay, I'll just tell those stories on the stage. Well, stories like that on the stage don't work as well as you think, because when you're watching and stand up, you don't know who the people are. So it's not as funny when I'm talking about my uncle who, has a limp and how he did this certain thing when we were on the side of the road. It's not as funny to you because I have to describe what he has. And if I do, then it ruins the joke. So I didn't know any of that stuff. So what happened was, at first, I thought, I'm not going to perform. This is crazy. So I went into the bathroom to try to find an exit window and sneak out the back window. And there was none. And I came back out, and there were 15 people that had gone to this workshop. 8 of them had already walked out the front door in the time it took me to go there and back once they found out we were performing. So more than 50% left. People always ask me what made me decide to stay. And I remember at the time having this vision. It was really quick, of me at that bar, standing at the bar next to another guy, and both of us older than dirt, and me saying to them, there's a comic on the stage, like this was in my vision, and me saying, I was going to do that one time, but I never did. And I recognized that living with regret was worse than the fear of the failure in the first place. So for whatever reason, I said, let's do it. And then it was, we were in this huddle saying who's going to go up first, because nobody wanted to be what we called the sacrificial lamb. And so ultimately, I went to Toastmasters once at that point and learned that if you're going to face fear like public speaking, go first. So I actually marched on the stage, grabbed the mic from its stand, and told what I consider to be the best joke I ever told in my life up until that point, to dead silence. And so then I dived into the second joke, dead silence, and maybe a tumbleweed this time went by the stage. And finally, Guy, and was the guy that got us into this mess, calls me over to the corner stage and gives me like a schmuck in the back of the head. And he says, "You idiot, what are you doing it there? We haven't even turned the mic on yet, buddy." And so here I'd been telling the jokes to an audience who couldn't hear me in the first place. That was my level. I didn't even know the mic wasn't turned on. And then we got the mic turned on. I told the jokes again. And guess what? They bombed again. So I think I'm the only comedian I know who's gone twice in 10 minutes with the same material. So why I bring this whole story up is because that's where my transition of my life happened, because I went to this show as a person that was working in the corporate world. And I went on the stage this night and did what I thought was impossible. And I did it because of this stage play that I was forced to actually have a part in. And so all these little, Steve Jobs would call them dots, I can join up the dots and realize all these things pushed me in the direction of becoming a speaker, because what happened after that is, because I survived that on that stage that night, even though I bombed horribly, I went back the next week. And then I went back the next week. And then I went back the next week. And then somewhere along the way in that first year, me and somebody went to a Tony Robbins event, and they said, "Can you believe he's getting paid to do that?" And I said, "Whoa, wait. People get paid to do this? I'm paying gas money to go to a comedy club and maybe making $5 from the door, and somebody's getting paid to do this in front of an audience, and they don't have to deal with hecklers or alcoholics." And I usually say alcoholics, just anybody drinking that's, in a club. It doesn't matter who it is. But having said that, that was like a light bulb moment. And I said, well, if I'm already going to be doing this anyway, and I'm willing to do it in front of people that are going to throw a beer bottle at me, why wouldn't I want to do it in front of an audience that wants to hear my message? And so that became I'm going to call it the transition, but the end result, which is kind of wild, is I still performed stand-up for 9 years, 700 shows. So I never left stand-up for quite a while, but then I did start teaching at the local community college. It took me a year to sell them on why they should bring me in as a teacher, but I did start teaching, and then that evolved into speaking. And so, yeah, that's kind of the journey of how I made the transition from that corporate sales world to actually what I spend most of my time doing these days.
So what makes someone a successful stand-up comedian, of all the different forms and people? And
so, you know what? I'm gonna give you a couple answers to that, but one of them most people don't want to hear, because it's the same thing that makes a person a successful speaker, a successful entrepreneur. I'll say it this way. Well, first of all, let's say time. Add it to perfect practice. So I heard that term one time, perfect practice, and it was important to me, because you can practice, but if you just practice the wrong stuff all the time, or you practice the same old, you never grow. So perfect practice to me is you're taking what you learned yesterday and bringing it into your practice today, and you're finding a way to be more efficient with your practice. So I remember one time, I think it was in the book called The Talent Code, they talked about why the Brazilian soccer players were so much better than other soccer players. And what it was is that they had to, the way their fields are set up, they had to turn quicker. So they would have to do 4 turns where somebody in America would have to do 1. And so that was the reason. So to me, that's perfect practice. They get to practice more in a short amount of time. And so when it comes to stand-up, I think it's the person that's willing to get on those stages more often, learn from what they're doing, and put the time in. And here, I'll back this up. A friend of mine who's a Star Search winner, she's one of the only female comics ever to win Star Search. So at the time she won it, she'd be considered, in theory, you would say I'm the funniest comic in the world, because I won Star Search for comics. And it took her 5 years to get a headline spot at a comedy club. 5 years of every week before they would put her on the last in the show. Yet she won a few years later, funniest comic in the world. Jerry Seinfeld said it took him 2 years to get 15 minutes of material that worked together. And so when we see him 20 years later, we think genius. And obviously his writing style would make him a genius to some degree. But what we don't see is the labor and the sweat of those 20 years of getting that material worked out. And I had a friend that was a comic one time in an interview say something so wise to me. I said, Mark, what do you think it is that the average person doesn't know about stand-up comedy? And he said, how much work goes into it to make it look like no work at all goes into it? Mm. And so my answer, which is not what people want to hear, is it's time plus perfect practice. Now, talent plays a part in that, and so does passion. If you're passionate about it, you're going to practice it better and more efficiently, but also you're going to have a smile on your face while you're doing it. And if you have a natural talent, you're going to catch it on quicker. But in my experience, there's people with, I call the non-talent factor, but that are just completely passionate. They put in the time, and there's a lot of times they'll go further than the person that naturally could have went further with them without any, like half of the work. Sometimes the best hockey players in the world will never know who they are because they never put in the hours, they never crafted it, and they never worked on their craft. So I guess that's my way of saying that what makes the best stand-up comics is somebody who's willing to get out to the comedy clubs and figure out what doesn't work and what does work and make changes as they have to, and then get back into the comedy club and practice that again and keep adjusting. What that also involves is recording your set and actually studying the minutia. So like comics, that's why I say comics are some of the best communicators in the world and presenters, is they'll actually study, why did it get a bigger laugh when I stepped on the 4th tile rather than the 6th tile? And, that could come down to the pause. Well, every time they do it when they step on the 6th tile, maybe they take a longer pause, and that pause works better than when they don't. But they're like, who studies the nuances of that? They do. So to me, a stand-up comic that does really well is somebody, taking out all the stuff about being a good writer and all the stuff that naturally, would have to come with it. I think it's learning the craft of comedy, practicing it a lot, and being willing to put in the 10,000 hours, just like the 10,000 hour rule. And I think the same applies to speaking. You can become an amazing speaker, even if you were terrified of being on a stage. And as an entrepreneur, you have to last, but if you put in the perfect practice and learn from your mistakes quickly and practice better practices quick as you can, and make decisions, like making, I believe it's also important to make quick decisions and then move on. If you can do those things, I think that puts you ahead of most.
And I was thinking about, not only comics, but just speakers in general, that I understand that you want to connect with the people in the audience. So what I'm hearing you say is that, you're thinking about all these things, pausing at the right time, speaking at the right time, delivering the line with the right tonality. You're thinking about all these things and connecting with people.
Yeah,
how did that happen?
No, I'm glad you asked that because, because you can go read a book. There's a great book called The Comedy Bible, and Judy Carter, who wrote The Comedy Bible, will give you all the steps, like all the format of what it takes to be a good comic, what it takes to write a good joke, and all that kind of stuff. So, I thought, well, first I'll share with you the things people don't see. Again, you just see a comic on a stage and you think they're brilliant, but you don't see, the practice they put in and them going every night and learning from it. And a lot of the top comics, they'll go on open mic night and perform for free. Dave Chappelle, Jerry Seinfeld, they show up in LA and New York all the time for free and perform at an open mic night to test new material. So to me, a good comic's willing to humble themselves to do that because they know there's no other place to learn that other than in front of a live audience. So that's one side. The other side comes down to what are the skills that you apply when you're in front of that audience. So, one of it is watching the audience for reaction. So, watching, is the audience, when I say this, are they kind of giggling? Are they coming with me? Or are they kind of doing this? And are they now not with me at all? Did I lose them for some reason? If I did lose them, was I planning to? So in other words, maybe I wanted to deliver something that was for shock value and I wanted to lose them. So that side of things. A good comic also may decide to, they might decide to actually pull you in and then basically flip the switch. So you think they're going one place, and then they have a great way to go, no, I'm not at all. I'm going over here. You didn't see that coming. And so that's something a comic can use as kind of like, I'm going to call it almost trick of the trade, if you will. But what I'll also say, which I didn't mention, is if you have the skill to do it, working with the audience. So whenever I, as a speaker, I'll open up my talks and I'll say, how many people here, if I could get you a spot on the local comedy club tonight, would jump on stage? And so there's a whole bunch of things happening there. It's not just me asking a question. It's me now engaging the audience. It's because I asked a question. Even if you're on your phone, you go, oh, I got to answer the question the guy just asked me. And then also because it's about a fear, then you're going, would I do that? And now you're going through the emotions of would I try it? So just with one tiny question, you can engage your audience at a level you could never do by trying to talk to them. And so I think a good comic does that as well. You might spritz and say, hey, you in the front row there. That's why you see a lot of comics do that, is then to your point, you actually are working with the audience. You're engaging them. Now they're on your side because you're chatting with them. Again, you can use that fool them. And you could do that. And then, of course, you could be now saying something to the person in the front row that his wife's laughing at, because now you're, pulling something out like, can you believe you wore that shirt tonight? Type of thing. So there's a whole bunch of little kind of tiny nuances that I'll go into it. How do you pause? How long do you pause? As you mentioned, tonality, eye contact with the audience. Are you asking questions to pull the audience in? Are you flipping the switch and making them think you're going one place and then shocking them with somewhere else? Another thing most people don't see that I learned early on is if you're doing new material, but you're bringing in a couple of jokes that work just so you can keep the audience with you, start with your second strongest and finish with your strongest. Even if you're actually trying all new material, figure out what the second strongest thing you think is, at least, and what the strongest is. And the reason you're doing that is because you need the second strongest to pull me in, otherwise you don't have me. But you need the strongest because you want me to walk away saying he was the best comic that night, or she was the best comic that night. So, hopefully that dived into the other side. And by the way, all those things apply equally to speaking in front of an audience. Everything I just said applies equally. When do you pause? What tonality do you use? Do you ask questions to engage the audience? So what I've told a lot of people is, people say, what's the difference to me between stand-up and speaking? To me, the only difference really is the type of audience you're in front of. And of course, that gives you more freedom to what they call in comedy, going blue. Dropping your F-bombs and all that. You can do that obviously a little bit more easily in front of a comedy club than a corporate side. And some comics struggle with that. I've actually referred comics to go do corporate speaking gigs. And I've either gotten in trouble or the comic didn't get paid and stuff because they were just F-bomb. And I told them, but they can't adjust because all they've done is comedy club stuff. And so for me, what worked well for me is I got the F-bombs out in the first year. And then I said, how can I be funny without F-bombs? So that way, if I'm going over to the corporate world, I won't be using them by accident. So I just covered a lot of ground there, hopefully. But
yeah, you sure did. And there's another question. I'm not sure if there's a good answer to it or not, but how sometimes a person might go to something where there's one speaker after another. Maybe there's 6 or 7 speakers, and they think, oh, I really like that one speaker because he or she, they said this, or this really resonated with me. But the question I have as a speaker is, how is that person going to connect your name with your speaking? Because you see this whole line of people, and at the end you say, I love that one, but then you can't remember what their name was or where they're from or what.
Absolutely. And it's funny because that even happens even at the top level of speakers that are kind of business celebrities. You think about, you go to events, there's been events over the years. I was thinking of this because I interviewed Tom Ziegler, Zig Ziglar's son, about this one time. And he talked about how he was at an event one time, a young kid, 8 years old, and his father was speaking. And there was like Colin Powell, Bill Clinton, Marianne Williamson, Zig Ziglar, and Zig was voted the best speaker that day. But the point is still, even there, of course, everybody's going to remember all of them because their names are well known. But how do you even stand out? Like, why was he the best speaker? Now, it was little nuances, but they're still powerful. And this maybe is some speaking tips for people as well. One of the things he did really well is he talked to the audience like he loved every person in the audience. And not every speaker can do that. And a trick, I think, I'll call it a trick. I don't think it's really a trick, but Brene Brown said she did this with her TED Talk, is she actually practiced as if she was talking to a family member that she really wanted to understand this message. And she treated the whole audience like it was that family member. And I think that's what Zig just did by nature. And so, that's one thing you could do is, instead of picturing the audience naked, think about the audience and how would you say this to the most important person in your life if you needed them to understand this message? So that's one thing. And the other thing Zig did is, the psychologist told him that he watched his talk and he said, you change stuff up every 7 minutes. And what they figured out is, this was in the 80s, and the advertising industry had figured out our attention spans were 7 minutes. So Zig was switching it up just before we'd run out of attention span. And so those are 2 tips people can use. But in terms of how do you stand out as a speaker and be remembered, obviously there's all the things I could tell you about how to be a world-class speaker, like be a masterful storyteller and all that stuff. Or maybe it's a powerful story like my comedy story, they'll remember the stand-up comic guy. Or maybe it's a shaved head from a branding point of view. There's all those things, but I'll tell you the best way to do it is to have them become engaged with you later, meaning if it happens after the fact. And here's the challenge. You could be on an event, it's even harder with this event, where you have 8 speakers, because you might be cut off the second you're done and another speaker's on. So you don't really have time to say, fill out an evaluation form, or say, here's a leave behind, or what have you. So what I would tell somebody to do is find a clever way. Now, you have to work this out with the organizer, but 90% of the time they're okay with this. Find a clever way to bring that person back to you. So one option, if they're open to it, is to say, hey, can I give away a free copy of my book to the audience? And then you give away a digital copy, and then you set up a landing page. And then you say, go to my, which this is true, by the way, this is my book, thebookofpublicspeaking.com. Go grab your free copy. And so, first of all, if they do that, which most people love a free book, then now you have a way to communicate with them afterward. And then when they see your email 2 or 3 times, now all of a sudden you stand out. They remember you because you're coming into their life now. That's one option. Second option, one of our students did this, and I think it's brilliant. His name is Dave Clare, to give him a shout out. He's an Australian speaker. And what he does is he actually says to the audience, I'm going to run a contest to see who can take the best picture of me while I'm speaking. And then the audience to take a picture of him. And then he wants them to put it on Twitter and hashtag Australian's best speaker or something like that. And then what happens is, now he has rights to use all these great pictures that were taken of him. He has people competing, so they don't forget him because they were involved in this engagement. Then he also knows how to reach them because they tagged him in. And then on top of that, he even trends a little bit on Twitter because of it. So what I'm getting at is find a way that works with the organizer that you can connect with them in the future. If you can do that, they won't forget you. You'll stand out because you're the only one doing that out of 8 speakers.
And that's great advice, because I was thinking, even if you have a book or something at the back of the room, not everybody's going to go pick that up.
No, if there's 1,000 people in the room and only 25 go get your book, you made an impression on those 25, and they probably won't forget you if they bought your book, but it's still it's 2.5% of the room, versus what I just said. If you can get an engagement, which realistically, you're probably going to get like 25, 30% would actually go grab the free book, because they got to give their email address and all that stuff. The Twitter thing, again, you're not going to get everybody in the room that's excited about taking a picture of you and tweeting it, or even having Twitter, but you're still going to get the right people, because these are the people that are engaged with you. They want to learn more about you. They're active enough to say, I'm willing to take a picture of this person. So it still puts you further ahead than the people that aren't doing those kind of things. Because the only other option you have is some sort of prop or something that makes you stand out. Like a white hat or something. Or actually, if you know who Michael E. Gerber is, the E-Myth, Michael Gerber is known for wearing his white hat. I mean, that helped him stand out. Now, he also had a powerful, unique message, helping entrepreneurs stay in business longer by using a franchise model, even if they're not franchises. I mean, that's a pretty cool idea, especially when he started teaching that. But having the white hat, and white suit, I'm sure helped. So you could also go that route too. So I would say you can get a combination of that. I wear Converse shoes every time I speak. I usually wear a blazer, but with jeans. I have a shaved head. So, I mean, I do stand out, but I still don't think, like to your point, 8 speakers, it's still hard to stand out unless you have something that allows them to engage with you after the fact.
Exactly. And we were talking about this, before we got on today. But why don't you address the situation we're having now, where all these events or trainings or corporate events, they're being postponed or canceled, and then you have all these speakers who that's their livelihood.
So let me start with I'm going to start with positive and try to sandwich it back to positive. So the first positive is I've been down this road before. I mean, 2008, we had the housing crisis recession, and I was a full-time speaker, and that's the only thing I had. Like, I had nothing else to rely on. And this is at a time when people weren't buying because they didn't have money to buy. And I mean, that's going to probably be similar to what this looks like in over the next few months. But I mean, that, with a recession, we don't know how long this will stay, but that was for sure over 2 years. So I had to deal with that for 2 years. What I did in that case, and you can't do this one move here, you have to find a new way to do this, but I pivoted between industries. So what I figured out what industries it hadn't hit yet. Like, for example, it started with corporations, and that was who I was working with. So I switched to memberships. So like the Plumbing Association of North America, and their members were still spending money, so they still had to provide training. But then eventually they started losing membership, and they're like, we can't do this. So then I jumped to education, and that's how I did that. But it was a pivot. It just happened then I could still pivot and speak. Now we can't go and do live talks, so we have to find a different way to pivot. But what I'm going to tell you is this will come back. I will almost, I don't want to say fully, but I will say 90%. I will state 90% of my reputation on this. This will come back stronger than speaking's ever been before. It has every time in the past. Like recessions and that have hit live speaking, it's come back stronger. Things hit the market, like the TELUS Summit was supposed to replace live speakers. Speaking last year, just before this all happened, it was the busiest year for speakers in history. And yet I was told 20 years ago when I started, almost 20 years, that telesummits were going to kill us. Then I was told that webinars. Then I was told Skype was going to remove us. And all of those things are actually smaller now than live speaking is. So the good news is, if you stick around in this, it's actually probably the best time to be going into speaking. And I'm going to say, probably within 6 to 9 months. I'm not saying today, but learn the craft now. The reason I say that is, think about this. You mentioned a key thing. People had to postpone their events. So I have events that were postponed on me. Well, they said, well, hopefully you'll still be able to speak with us when we run the event. But what happens if I can't? Those are now opportunities opened up for a brand new speaker who wouldn't have had that opportunity before. Then you're going to have people that are craving live speakers more than ever before. So the demand is going to force more events. And so it's going to come back stronger. But let's talk about today, because we're not there yet. And so what I'll say is, for me, I don't like the word lucky. I had good intuition maybe, or something happened. I don't even know what it was. But I had already planned for this spring, for the first time in 19 years, not to book myself 10 to 12 bookings a month. So because of that, I didn't lose all my bookings because of that. So I don't even it's just things happen. We don't know why, but I mean, for whatever reason, it happened that way. Having said that, here's the first thing I would say. Somebody that's into speaking now, you want to make sure this doesn't happen again in the future. It could even be as simple as, if we have a second wave of this that comes in later than we think, and live events come back, and then you lose it again. So the first thing you should have is the right contract, speaking agreement. And so I had maybe 5 events postponed versus the 60 or 65 I would have had in a normal year. The 5 events postponed, I never lost anything other than my remaining balance on it, because I typically get 75% up front, which is rare. I don't recommend new speakers do that, but usually you should get a 50% deposit. But on my agreement, it says, if the event is canceled due to no fault of my own, then you have a credit with me for up to a year. But what it meant is, I didn't all of a sudden lose all those bookings. I didn't have to now pay back people on top of losing the bookings. And then not only that, they have a vested interest to want to make it work with me, because they only have to pay the additional 50 or 25% versus a brand new speaker. So this is just a way to protect yourself as a speaker. Your contract should outline what happens in a circumstance like this. And most people don't have that. They shake hands, say, here we go. They do it via email. And then all of a sudden the client says, well, the event didn't run. We're losing all our money. Sorry, you're going to have to give us back money. And so that's the first thing I would say. But again, let's talk about, what about the person, what does it look like out there in the speaking world right now? What you're seeing is a lot of people trying to pivot to online. So virtual events, and really mostly virtual events, and to a lesser degree, workshops. Like, can I work with those same clients to do a workshop? I will say some of the postponed events, they've come back and said, if we do this as an full online event with 3,000 attendees, would you be interested in presenting that way? And they're all like, none of them have actually done that yet. They're toying with it and doing surveys. So what that's doing is getting some speakers to say, could I be going to my clients and maybe doing some of the stuff online? And I know I'll have to charge a lesser fee. People will never pay as much to have you there live, or pay as much to have you online as live. So people are going, okay, well, if I don't have to travel, some people are saying, maybe I can do 3 workshops online for the same price that I would have done a live event, but I don't have to leave, and maybe I can do them all in the same day, for example. So we're seeing some people try to do that. We're seeing, as I was telling you offline as well, we're seeing some people are just saying, maybe this is the time right now that I build my brand bigger, so I get people to know me more. Come out, maybe I was always busy and couldn't do that. Maybe this is the time I pivot a bit. Maybe do I add, as an example, I'm seeing some of my students do this, do I add some online stuff, like online courses, online events? Maybe do I now reach out to individuals rather than the company that's going to hire me to talk? And do I maybe see if there's a demand for me teaching how to run a virtual event? So that's a long way to say you're seeing a whole bunch of people try different things, but the common theme from that is most people are trying to figure out, how can I take this stuff online? And so I'm actually running, I mentioned this to you, I've done lots of online workshops for clients, paid online workshops, but I'm running my first big virtual event type summit in mid-June. So depending on when a person's listening to this, mid-June 2020, when they're listening to this, the event's probably over, but at the same time, I'm running my first one. This is me doing that. Now, I will tell you that I had already pivoted pivot it before this happened. I'm launching Blue Talks, the brand, in a few weeks. And that was part of the reason I didn't take on as many bookings. I just launched my latest book, another reason. I also have a speaking program helping people get paid to speak, and also have a TEDx program helping people land their brand to talk. So I kind of I'd already pivoted quite a bit. And that's what I would recommend a speaker does. You need to figure out how you can have another stream of income. That's the real takeaway here, because this is going to happen again at some point. I would say in my speaking career, something like this will happen again in the next 10 to 15 years. So the question is, do you have enough of a pivot in place that it won't sink you? And when I go back to 2008, that's the one regret I have. Now I made it through okay, but the one regret I have is that I didn't have any extra stream. I had a newspaper that was bringing in advertising, but it wasn't big enough to, if the speaking would have ended, it would have been tough. And right now it's ended for a lot of people. So I would say, if you have no other choice, use this as a time to both study up and get ready to crush it as a speaker, but also figure out what is the second stream of income I could have so that I never run into this again. So that's my takeaway from this, is you got to figure out how to pivot and what do you bring to the table that people will pay for. Now, I'll add this one last thing. I'm also seeing people pivot for the wrong reasons. I've seen people that have 10-year podcasts that are saying, I'm not sure if it's the right time to have a podcast, and they're leaving it when it's probably the best time ever to have a podcast, because you can get guests you would never be able to get before, and on and on. So I'm seeing people make pivots that I question, but it's their choice to make. And at the same time, in the speaking, what I would say is and I see people doing this, don't pivot to something you haven't had success in just because you're trying to make money in it and say, now I'm going to be the expert in that. And I won't ever say a name, but I mean, I have had people in my program who come to me saying, how can I get a paid booking, who are now trying to teach people how to get paid bookings. So don't become that person. I mean, it should be something you already know you're good at, or you have a success in, or even something, if you're going to teach something you're just learning, tell people that. Say, I'm a couple of steps ahead of you, which makes me the perfect person to teach this to you because I'm currently learning it myself. Mm-hmm. And maybe partner up with somebody else who's a couple of steps ahead. So you can say, if I do have questions, I have so-and-so who's my mentor. But I would say pivot, but only do something that you know that you actually are ahead of other people in. Don't try to just do something because it seems like the right thing to do as a shortcut.
Exactly. And, as you're speaking, I was thinking about, all the people that you interviewed. So there was a point where you were in the beginning, but because you interviewed so many people, you became the expert just by providing the experts or, showcasing what they knew.
Yeah, to that point, there's a book behind me here. I'll give a shout out to him because I actually was planning to reread the book again soon, so maybe I'll take it home and start rereading it. But Brendan Burchard, The Millionaire Messenger. And this book here, he talks about the different types of experts there are in the book. So this, to just tag on to what you were just saying, he talks about the different type of experts. And, one of them is the one who has learned it in the trenches. Full like sales, let's say, like I did sales in the trenches. You learn it, you become the expert by doing it. Another one is that you study with other people and learn from them, like as mentors, let's say. But the other one is, he said, a lot of people don't realize this, you can become an expert just by being the interviewer of the experts. And it goes back to what I mentioned, full circle to Napoleon Hill and Think and Grow Rich. Napoleon Hill became famous by teaching other people stuff. Famous, I mean, he had probably actually impacted more lives overall than some of the people's stuff he was teaching, because they estimate 100 million people have read the book. It's great that they say more self-made millionaires than any other book in history. And yet his claim to fame was being the guy who interviewed all the experts and shared their insight. And I've sort of followed that path, not by choice, just I was a fan of his work, but it was just I got obsessed by interviewing people and learning from them. And so, yeah, you can truly position yourself as the expert by interviewing other experts. And really, as podcasters, that's what we're all doing.
That's what we're all doing. And that's what drives me. I love learning. I love inspiring. So by having guests, I inspire, I learn, and makes me want to do more.
And you become the curator for other people, because now they don't have to go and read 50 books to try to find out who the right person is. They go to your show and go, well, if she selected them and I like her show and I like who she brings on, I'll trust this person's going to be a good expert as well. Mm-hmm. So we become the curators for other people's knowledge too, which is really cool, because people always ask me, how can I feed my mind properly now when there's just so much stuff? It's so consuming. And I always say, pick the 5 people that you trust the most and either learn what they're learning, what are they reading and watching, or if they have a show, see who they're bringing on. Who do they like? Because if you resonate with them, then you can just go to the sources they recommend rather than you having to try to scour the internet to find all that stuff. So I think find the right hosts of shows that are interviewing people and then just dive into who they bring on. And if they like them, you probably are going to like them as well.
Exactly. And the other thing I wanted to ask, so you talked about when all of this kind of calms back down and we actually go out and we do things. If someone wants to be a speaker, and let's say they're new, how do they get out and practice, or how do they get out and actually find places to speak or get started? Because
it's well, right now, of course, I'm glad you said the part once it gets back to normal, because right now you can't go out and find places to speak unless you're in a place where they've said the restrictions are you can be in front of 5 or 10 people outside and you can stand enough far apart from them to speak to them. There's not really a lot of stages right now. But I mean, I would say learn it right now by speaking to people. If you haven't done Facebook Live interviews, not spoke on video, even though it's a different medium, this would be a great time to do that because it's going to also get you better at communicating. But in terms of what I would do, I always recommend for people, if you're starting out, here's kind of for me, the plan I wish I would have known when I started. First thing I tell people always is reach out to local events like a Rotary. So these are chapters or associations, a business association that brings in speakers, a chamber of commerce that brings in speakers. So reach out to associations that bring in speakers. Typically, they won't pay speakers, but at first you need to get on the stages before you can think about getting paid. So what I would say is get the stages you can get. Reach out. And maybe even post on Facebook. I'm looking to do more speaking. Anybody know where I can give back my time? If you're brand new, who cares? It doesn't matter if people know you're getting paid or not. But what you need to get is those stages. But here's the part that takes it to the next level. What I would do if I had known otherwise is once you talk to the person about, I'll use a chamber as an example. You reach out to a chamber president and say, I'd love to come in and talk at your chamber event to your membership. And the president says, sounds good. And what I would do then is I would say, how many people do you think would be in the room? Because I want to make sure I get enough evaluation forms ready. So I'm saying this purposely because I'm saying it low key so they don't think it's a big deal because I want to bring my evaluation forms there. And so let's say it's 100 people going to be in the room. Now I'm taking all the things out of the case, like promoting the event and that for the sake of our discussion here. Let's assume they promote the event, they fill the room, what have you. So what I would do is I would get those kind of stages. And the great part is they're bringing the audience, so you don't have to do that work. The reason you want a chamber or Rotary is because it's different business owners in the room. So the benefit of that, rather than trying to get a company gig that's non-paid, is if it's a company gig and 100 staff members, those staff members, chances are, can't bring you in to speak at their house. They can't pay to bring you in to speak. But those separate business owners at the chamber can. So that's one benefit of that. But what I would do is I would get in front of 100 people, let's say, and then I would want to hand out my evaluation form. And I'm just using examples, but let's say you're there before they are, hand the evaluation forms out, and then you deliver a knock it out of the park talk. And at the end, you tell them at some point, I usually tell them either at the beginning and the end or at the end when I'm winding down, but you'll find there's some evaluation forms there on the desk. I want to ask you guys a super huge favor because I always say if I don't know, I don't grow. So I just want to see if you guys could do me a solid and fill out the evaluation form so the next group can benefit from your knowledge. And people want to help other people. So there's a reason I'm saying it this way. But then I also say, but I'm going to give you, and now I do this, I'm going to give you an extra bonus for filling it out. If you put your email address there, I'm going to send you a free copy of my book, enter name here. And people love free books, as I mentioned earlier. Yeah. So they'll fill out the evaluation form for that. But my ratio is still about 80%, even without the gift. With the gift, it's about 95%. That's why I added it. But here's the benefit to this. It's an evaluation form that I have that's very tailored. And so the evaluation form says stuff like, what did you hear today that you could use tomorrow? How will you use it? Those are just kind of showing people that you care about what they learned, but also it tells you, did they actually listen? Because if they can tell you your number one takeaway message is what they learned, then they listen. The next question starts getting into the really powerful ones, which is, what do you wish I would have covered that I didn't? And so let's say I spoke on customer service, and I mentioned personality types. They might say, oh, I wish you would have covered more about personality types. Well, now I can go back to that chamber and say, hey, the people that were there want to learn about personality types. You should bring me in again. So that's one way to do it. The next question is the most important, which is, who do you know of others who could bring me in to speak on a similar topic as to the one I presented today? If so, can we contact you to follow up? And basically, what you're doing now is you're basically doing an action rather than just leaving them to walk up and say, hey, well, you should come in and speak at our event. Here's what I discovered. If you had 100 people in the room, you will get those 2 people or 3 people to come up with their card and say, hey, we need to talk. But there might be 15 people that could hire a speaker that don't come up because they're scared to walk up to a speaker because they're nervous around a speaker, or you have a line in front of you, or they just say, I got to get back to work. So now in this evaluation form, it's low key, low pressure. They can fill it out. It's a call to action. And then you're in charge to reach out now. Now you have the email, you know they have a lead, they'll say who it is. And so that question alone on the evaluation form is responsible for, we figured out around 30% of my bookings over the last 18 years. So if I were brand new, I would do that earlier, of course. And then just to finish this all off, the evaluation form also says, can we add you to our newsletter? So now all of a sudden you might add 60 people from your newsletter just by being there. Another one is, what is your thoughts on today's presentation? And can we use your comments on our website? So now a room of 100 people, say 70 separate business owners say, yeah, you can. And my name is Jim with John's Plumbing. Well, now that means you have 70 testimonials from your very first talk ever. You know how many speakers would love to have that? And then the final question is additional comments. And I get some of my best feedback and comments on that one question, additional comments. So if I were to start all over, I would follow that pattern, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And what happens is you might not be in for a paid booking when you call the chamber, but your odds are pretty good that out of those 15 that said they'd like to bring you in to talk, 5 of them could be paid speaking engagements. And then of course the last part of that is follow up. Now you have to follow up and reach out to them. And that's a whole nother discussion, because then how do you sell them and all that stuff? But my point is you said, what would I do if I was starting over? That's what I would do. Follow that pattern.
Beautiful. Simple, to the point. So you've been so full of information and helpful. So where can people find you? Do you have a website? What do you have coming up next? You talked about several things.
Yeah, so thank you so much. And so I guess Blue Talks is the most current and present thing for me. We're doing our full launch about 3 weeks to 4 weeks from today. So it depends when people are listening. Because this is evergreen, you could be listening a year from now, and in which case it'll be all running and all that kind of stuff. But if people want to check out Blue Talks and learn more about what that's all about, the website's easy. It's blue without the E, so BLU, bluetalks.com. So very easy website. Blue stands for Business Life Universe. So what it's like is essentially, because it's hard sometimes to visualize, it's a branded series like Mind Valley, like Goalcast, or like TEDx. And essentially our focus is around those 3 areas I mentioned. And we bring people onto stages. You know, one of our last events was at Harvard University. So we bring people on stages. We are launching the podcast. We're launching the book series, and we're launching a virtual event all at once. And so that's Blue Talks. That's really the biggest thing I'm working on. And also you talked about stages and platforms. One of the great things about this brand is it gives me an opportunity to give more people platforms. We already have over 100 people involved in Blue Talks now, and we haven't fully launched yet. So we're giving these people stages, opportunities, that even the ones that don't want to speak on a stage, they get to write a chapter in a book and be featured on the podcast. They can still get their message out without having to take a stage. The other side of my life is if people want to learn more about our programs that we talk about, the easiest website to go to is thespeakingprogram.com. So thespeakingprogram.com. You can probably tell I like easy websites. And if you go there, because I don't want to give you a third website address to find. So if you go to either of those 2, and you'll find me with them. You can Google me. You can find me on social media, reach out, say hi. But I think I'd like to stick with those 2 hubs, so I'm not confusing people and they're trying to write down a bunch of different addresses. So bluetalks.com, blue without the E, and the speakingprogram.com will be the 2 hubs.
All right, great. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And before we get off, one last question. What do you feel gives someone the most incredible, extraordinary life?
Wow. This is interesting because I just did a masterclass called the Epic Life Masterclass. And it was 4 weeks, an hour each time. So, and I did a bonus week. So 5 hours to cover this one question. But I'll tell it to you in an easier way. That I think fully dials it in. I learned this formula years ago by studying the highest of achievers. I call the Better Life formula. And this is the quick answer to it. The formula itself is finding ways to increase positive energy, finding ways to decrease negative energy, and living on purpose. And so this is what the highest of achievers do over and over again. And so there's a lot encompassed in that, but the increase in positive energy could be meditating. could be reading the right books, could be attending the right events. Decreasing negative energy could be stopping watching the news, stop investing in the gossip and negativity. And then the living on purpose means finding your why. So I make it seem so small, but it is a really big thing, and there's a lot of facets to it. But I think if you want to live an ideal and an epic life, then, at the end of the day, why not follow what the giants before us have done? And that's what I've noticed is the common pattern. They find ways to every day increase their positivity, decrease the negativity, and then live further on purpose. That would be my answer.
Well, thank you so much. And we'll talk to you again soon.
Awesome. It's my absolute pleasure. Thank you so much. And thanks, Kimberly, for all the great work you're doing.
Thank you.